The year 1967 was a year of violence, of war, riots, of disasters. Again, the war in Vietnam monopolized the front pages around the world. Air bombings increased, casualties growing pressure for both sides to cease. Martin Luther King was a leading protester.
Let us save our national honor, stop the bombing, and stop the war.
There were anti-war demonstrations on college campuses and in cities from Los Angeles to Washington. Draft card burnings became common, and the chant of "Hell no, we won't go" was the theme of the protest generation.
Hell no, we won't go!
Premier Kosygin met with President Johnson at Glassboro, New Jersey, in a little summit meeting that both men pronounced a success in furthering friendly communication between the two nations. And a whopping success in bringing the peoples of many nations closer together was Expo 67 in Montreal. Queen Elizabeth led a parade of foreign dignitaries, and the only one out of step was French President de Gaulle. He lost friends and alienated people by calling for a Quebec province free of Canadian rule. The U.S. space program took a giant step forward with the Apollo.
All engines are running. We have liftoff. We have liftoff at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Separation came at an altitude of 38 miles, and a camera aboard the Apollo recorded the dramatic moment as the burned-out first stage dropped behind and the spacecraft soared into the heavens. There was tragedy, too. Roger Chaffee, along with Ed White, who made a famous spacewalk, and space veteran Gus Grissom were burned to death on an Apollo training mission. The martyrs to space research received heroes' funerals, and further Apollo trials were postponed until greater safety standards could be set. Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov became the first known casualty of actual spaceflight. He was buried among Soviet heroes in the Kremlin Wall. China's Mao Zedong unleashed his Red Guards against his enemies. And Defense Minister Lin Piao announced the detonation of a hydrogen bomb. Mao instigated months of rioting by Reds in British Hong Kong, Red China's only door to the Western world. The British cracked down, and by year's end, terrorism was on the wane. In June, Egypt's President Nasser precipitated a war with Israel when he ordered the United Nations to withdraw their policing force from the Israeli border and then moved 80,000 of his own troops into the Sinai Peninsula. No one doubted that war was only a matter of hours away as UN forces withdrew. But the Israelis struck first. The 20-year-old nation under Defense Minister Moshe Dayan seized the initiative and quickly drove Egypt from the sky. In 6 days, it was over, the shortest major war in history. Israel controlled the Sinai Peninsula, the east bank of the Suez, and had reunited the divided city of Jerusalem. Chief of Staff Yitzhak Rabin had to order his men to stop taking prisoners, just send them home. There were tearful celebrations at that holiest of shrines for the Jewish people, the Wailing Wall. For the first time since the 1948 war, all faiths were able to worship here once more. At year's end, however, there was still no real peace in the Middle East. The Arab nations refused to acknowledge their defeat, and at the United Nations, Premier Kosygin called for a withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territory she had won, a request Israel rejected. On the home front, it was a long, hot, riotous summer. In Newark, in Detroit, and in other major cities, civil rights protests blossomed into full-fledged riots that bordered on anarchy. Looting, sniping, and arson caused millions of dollars in damage. In Newark alone, 30 persons were killed in 4 days of rioting, with arrests numbering in the thousands. New Jersey's Governor Hughes had to call out the National Guard before order was restored. A week later, it was Detroit where 40 more died and damage was almost incalculable. In the Motor City, it took federal troops to bring the disorders to an end. The president deplored the riots.
Looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights. They are criminal conduct.
In the pro and con over the riots, one thing was certain: major social reforms were needed. 1967 marked the 50th anniversary of the Russian Revolution, and the Soviets pulled out all the stops to make it a propaganda field day. Britain was in financial troubles again, and the pound was devalued, while Prime Minister Wilson called for more belt-tightening. An attack on the dollar led by France followed Britain's move. But Washington pledged to keep the dollar as sound as a dollar.
Now there are pressures on our economy, which demand that we ask for a portion of that $24 billion back in the form of a surcharge. It would be a penny out of every dollar.
With the slogan, "Make love, not war," the hippies declared their own war on the establishment, vowing to drop out of Western civilization and pioneer the new frontiers of the mind. President Johnson had another important summit meeting in 1967, a meeting with his first grandchild, Patrick, son of Lucy, a proud grandpa. And 1967 ended on a happy note, the first White House wedding since the Wilson administration. Linda Bird married Marine Captain Charles Robb to prove once again, when history is written, love conquers all.